Welcome back, everybody, to Startup Happy Hour. As I mentioned earlier, Startup Happy Hour is a monthly informal community building and learning event for founders, entrepreneurs, and innovators that we launched in 2017. Pre-COVID, let's see. Bear with me here. Pre-COVID, we used to do this in a restaurant or pub. This is some of these are shot at Hot Italian or at the Red Rabbit. And we would get a veteran entrepreneur to stand up there and basically field questions from the audience after after an hour or so of networking. Obviously, with COVID, we've had to shift, and now we're doing this virtually. But it's brought to you. It's a collaboration between StartupSac and the Carlson Center. StartupSac is a nonprofit and we're all about accelerating Sacramento's startup and innovation ecosystem by doing events like this and through resources on our website. And Cameron, would you like to say a word about the Carlson Center?
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you, Jeff and Laura, for the continued partnership on this. Thank you all for being here. My name's Cameron Law, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Carlsen Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and I'm joined by one of our team members, Arlene Miranda, and then we have our Student Entrepreneurship Club on the Carlsen Center of ViewSonic. So we're excited for them to be plugging in tonight. But we serve as a regional hub and platform for providing approachable and accessible entrepreneurial education, community, and support to enable startup founders of all backgrounds to scale and launch their businesses. And we're excited to have you here for our collaboration with StartupSac on the Startup Happy Hour. So back to you, Jeff.
Great. So StartupSac would not be possible without the support of our generous sponsors. So we'd like to take a moment to say thank you and give a shout out to our sponsors: SMUD, Witten Law, Bender Insurance, Nivagen, Stoll Reeves, Weintraub Tobin, Holcomb Law Group, Clifton Larson Allen, Moneta Ventures, and Ernst & Young. And we'd like to give a special shout out to SMUD, who is our platinum sponsor, and play this short 30-second ad by them.
SMUD presents Clean Power City Champions.
I want to live in a clean power city. That's why I drive an electric vehicle.
I want to live in a clean power city because I want to help stop the climate change.
We want to live in a clean power city
because we want our first child to inherit a better world.
Let's create a clean power city.
And join the charge to a cleaner future.
Join the charge.
Learn how you can join the charge with SMUD at cleanpowercity.org.
So thanks again to SMUD, and I am going to stop into all our sponsors. And it's time to turn things over to Cameron for the interview. So Cameron, take it away.
All right. Well, I'm going to spotlight Ashita and myself, and I'm not, where am I? There I am. I passed myself up here. So awesome. Well, thank you, Ashita, for joining us, and thank you all for joining us for this Startup Happy Hour. And it is my pleasure to introduce and interview our Startup Happy Hour guest, Dr. Ashita Shah, who is the CEO and co-founder of Matrubials. Matrubials is a spin out from UC Davis, the UC Davis's Food for Future Health Institute. As the associate director, Dr. Shah had spun that out of that program. During the Food for Health Institute, she investigated the role of milk components in human health, specifically in terms of infectious diseases. And then prior to Matrubials, she worked at Genentech, where she was a senior researcher in the infectious diseases and did her postdoctoral work at Columbia University, where she received several awards, one being on her thesis, as well as a key researcher and speaker. And with Matrubials spinning out, she's tapped into a number of entrepreneurial programs, both in the Sacramento and Bay Area region. And according to Crunchbase, Matrubials has raised $125,000 in pre-seed funding from the Silicon Valley Accelerator, Y Combinator, which we'll be talking about a little bit later as we dive into the Ashita story. And additionally, Ashita and Matrubials has been a cohort member in Sacramento-based FourthWave and the Growth Factory, and more recently has been named by the Sacramento Business Journal one of their innovation awardees. So we're excited and in good hands today with Ashita. So before we kind of get diving down into the conversation about the business, I would love to learn a little bit more about your background in the science field. And if you ever really thought of startups and entrepreneurship as something in your kind of career path. We do have some students here, and they might be in the science space and maybe haven't always seen themselves as an entrepreneur. Is that something that you had looked at early in your career?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for the introduction, Cameron. I'm really honored and delighted to be here, reconnect with some of you who I have met before and meet many new people. As far as my background goes, I've been an infectious disease researcher for almost 20 years now in the US. And prior to that, I received my undergraduate and master's training in India. So as part of like a college level inaugural biotechnology program, that's where I actually fell in love with science and wanted to continue to build on in terms of an academic research background with microbiology there, and then continued on that on the East Coast at UMBC, where I got my PhD. And I literally like just worked in different bacterial mechanisms and tried to understand the deeper levels of intricacies that led to their behavioral aspects and signaling, and was really very keen on pursuing continued academic research for many years. Always fascinated by entrepreneurship in many ways, and learn how business happened, how products got translated from concept to market, from the discovery to all the way in terms of development. But I was keen on continuing academic work because, as I had learned early on in my life, 80 to 85% of innovation that happened through the industrial aspects also originally happened because the universities had invested for many long years into honing down and the deeper understanding of the scientific details of it. So for me, it was always about, where do I get to really develop a good story? And it didn't matter whether the bench was at a university or whether the bench was at a corporate biotech company like Genentech. But they both taught me completely different aspects of how you can eventually impact human health. So in terms of academic research, we continue to work on and really dive very deep into singular problems. But those same things are taken by the companies and they get translated in a business development aspect, and they can actually have value for human health in many ways. So I've been really taking into my course the best lessons from both places and then continuing on my journey. And the way Matrubials came out was, again, as part of our work at UC Davis, as we started to learn more about potential of some of these ingredients that are present in natural milk, it was just one of those days where we realized that, well, this is really something that needs to be taken out, that needs to be a way of developing into a product and giving back to the public in terms of a contribution, and something that can be actually much bigger than what we are envisioning right now, that can lead to a product and better some people's lives at the end of the day if everything got lined up. And so we founded it, and there we were, starting the lessons of early stage founding, taking it as a spin out from the university. Now, luckily, as part of the Foods for Health Institute, the pioneer scientists who have been involved in the milk bioactives program, so these are professors Bruce German, David Mills, Carlito Labrilla, Danny Bareilles. They have been working on structure function analysis of milk and the benefits that they can bring to infant health and maternal health for almost 20 years now. And Matrubials happens to be the third spin out from that program, with the other two companies being Evolve Biosystems and BCD Bioscience. They're both really good companies in the Sacramento-Davis region as well, and at different stages in their life cycle as compared to where Matrubials is. So we are the third spin out from the FFHI and are delighted to be taking notes and lessons from other healthcare companies in the area. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing the background and obviously the immense research that you've done in the a variety of aspects, and especially with UC Davis and being able to come up with Matrubials. What can you take us back to that time that you there was kind of that day you realized, hey, we need to bring this to society. It can't just be research that we publish and talk about. What went into your mind and with the team, and how you made that transition to say, let's actually spin this out and take next steps on that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So it dates back all the way to 2012, actually, when I had not even joined UC Davis. There were postdoctoral scientists who were again working in the Foods for Health and Milk Bioactives program, Dave Dallas and Shabnam Kajavi, who had originally discovered that human milk is composed of many of these very specific peptide molecules that are naturally occurring. And amongst many other functionalities, these peptides actually have antimicrobial function. So what they had done is they had taken milk and separated it into different components and found out groups of molecules that could kill infection-causing bacteria. And that was sort of what they had discovered. When I joined in, I followed up with lots of advanced proof of concept studies, where now we could take these molecules and learn about their sequences. And without relying on actual donor human milk, which is meant for babies who are in need, or even livestock for getting that milk from either cows or other species, we wanted to test if getting proof of concept studies with synthetically made or lab-made peptides could deliver functionalities that we were looking at from natural milk. And when we started to look at that, we understood that any sequence changes also in these molecules can lead for us to be developing specific strategies where these molecules can have the right functionalities and can actually have even more ability to differentiate between really who's good for you and who's not good for you. So evolutionarily, mother's milk has been designed so that it's allowing babies to develop the right microbiome or the good microbiome, keeping the bad guys at bay. And these peptides that were discovered were exactly also doing that. And in order to then develop a whole business strategy, we started looking at what is the niche market for it. The day we realized that these are actually also very selective was the day we decided we need to take these out and spin them and make products that can be delivered via different means, but for a variety of infectious disease indications. And then that's how Matrubials' idea and first indication came into place. So and it's interesting how the name came about. So Matrubials is antimicrobials from the mother, and matru is like an original word for mother in Sanskrit. And so we literally combined the two words, matru and antimicrobials, to give it that name. And so it's mother nature, mother's milk, all of those together. And when we wanted to understand, like, what are the first indications to go after, coming from the milk program where maternal health and infant health are really of prime importance, we realized that reproductive health has major outcomes that have a generational impact, and decided to focus on infectious disease in women of reproductive age groups. And that's how that led to our initial indication of bacterial vaginosis, which is our sort of laser-focused mission at this time, while we advance into other diverse indications as well.
Wonderful. So you, it sounds like you took some of that like proof of concept and recognized a niche focus, and then really started to narrow that down, I guess, in terms of identifying core customer segment. What was that? Is that part of the Food for Health Institute program, or was that something that you kind of used other methodologies to go about in terms of refining that? What was kind of that process? It's certainly unique, I think, to your space, but could be applied to other businesses as well that have that kind of technology at the core of what they're building.
Yeah, it was a combination of the advice that we were having with the Foods for Health Institute, but also the UC Davis Venture Catalyst. So we were a spin out that got a lot of advice from the Venture Catalyst and their services and their continued resources. It's called the Biotechnology Innovation Gallery that UC Davis runs as sort of like an accelerator. They do invite a lot of experts for workshops and help spin out companies. But it was with their help that we did a lot of early market research in terms of indications and groups of people that can be interested in strategic partnerships, strategic developments as part of like this whole group of literally, what do you do if you want to develop an antibiotics 2.0 program out of the Davis, Sacramento area? And how do you start that? How do you define the workflow? And what actually happened was, one of the programs that's sort of a grant mechanism offered by Venture Catalyst, it's called the STARE program, where if you already are at IP stage and have filed an IP, or are at a discovery stage where you envision that it can be a patentable discovery, they actually help you with initial funding that can flush out or advance the work that can lead to IP. What happened for Matrubials is that we had just formed the company, and we were amongst the top 16 companies that got through into the STARE program. We didn't get funded, but because we were in the top 16 and didn't make it to the top 5, we were still offered mentorship via external members who are affiliated with the UC Davis Venture Catalyst program. That got introduced us to the California Life Science Advisory Program. And that's a fast advisory program that's out of the Bay Area. And they're very detail-oriented in terms of a 4-month program that allowed us to have 12 different advisors as part of our selection into the FAST program. What that did for us is completely change the trajectory in the way where Matrubials was heading to, because the 12 advisors that they had put on board for us came from very diverse groups of expertise in terms of taking discovery, whether it's antimicrobial or other therapeutics, all the way from bench to the market, whether it be with acquisitions or IPO, and also strategic healthcare related developments, regulatory advice, and overall just helped us, do our SWOT analysis to perfection and define our workflow in a much better way. But more importantly, what it told me is that as a startup entrepreneur, you have to keep everything open. You have to apply to many different places. You have to write multiple grants. You cannot be shy about, hey, I'm waiting for Accelerator A, so I'll just wait until I receive a decision before I apply anywhere else. You have to take a multi-pronged approach and really fast track and just improve your own appetite for hard work by like 3x, 4x, 5x, and then just go all out in terms of reaching these different organizations. So at the end of the CLSI program, we had made progress in terms of where we were going, but also started to think in terms of IP strategy, SBIR strategies, accelerator strategies. So I think that was in many ways a very defining moment for us to be accepted in the FAST program. And I would recommend that to any life science oriented company to go through their, twice a year cohort. It's a small group with 10 companies or 12 companies each year, or maybe sometimes even smaller. But really, it's a paradigm shift, I guess, in early stages for any life science company.
Awesome. So much yeah. good stuff there. I think just to kind of reiterate some of the things that I heard to, hopefully stick for some of our entrepreneurs and people looking to go through the process. Certainly Venture Catalyst is a great partner in the ecosystem. And I know one of their core components that you spoke to was that customer development process, right? So getting out there and talking to the customers, right, who would be the end users, but also some of those partners and how you'd get that out into the market. And then I love the points that you're making on leveraging the resources and not waiting for it to necessarily come to you, right? So getting out there and seeking those resources and kind of putting it in motion and things start to come your way. I know we'll talk a little bit later about FourthWave, but I know setting that intention out into the world and making that happen. So I do have just a couple quick follow-ups to some of the things that you shared. One, in terms of the California Life Science Advisory, I think it's like CLA is the FAST program.
Correct.
So you had 12 different advisors. I'm curious of how you leverage that and utilize that. I know that can be a lot of information coming in. So kind of curious of what those relationships look like and how you set yourself up for success in working with those advisors.
No, that's really a great question, because what happens is when you're part of this kinds of program and you talk with these advisors in and out for 4 months at a stretch, even if they're once in 2-week meetings, you actually end up developing really good relationships with them. And so what we have been able to do is, even beyond the program ending, we have retained 4 of those advisors as part of our ongoing consultants that we will also be continuing to work with as part of our grant strategy as we go forward. And, depending on availability and interest and commonalities, we're eventually going to be building a scientific advisory board by the end of this year. But these relationships with accelerators, with advisory groups, they start at that time, but they are ongoing and they are almost, long-term partnerships in many ways. And we are very grateful that the 12 advisors who came on board, they actually, each one brought so much to the plate from their own long-term experiences, and also some who were startup founders, but had 2 more years ahead of me. And we're still in these early stage challenging periods that they could relate to some of the things that I was navigating, or offer, red flags, or yes, do that, or no, not do that. Just, really simplifying some of these decision-making processes that they may have gone through not too long ago. So it was very useful in all ways that I can describe. And in fact, it was there that I learned from other founders and other senior members of the CLSI that, IndieBio or Y Combinator would be a really good way to continue to develop it and also enhance the networking opportunity, but bring to the plate several different unique features from every accelerator that defines its core principles based on, and we'll get a little more into that in terms of the different programs I have gone through and what I've learned in so many ways from each of them that's really unique and special.
Awesome. Well, just a couple more items and then we'll head into the accelerator portion, since I know you've tapped into those resources and want you to share those experiences. Certainly in spinning out Matrubials, there's a unique process in bringing, Matrubials to life in terms of, regulations and things like that. So one, would love to kind of, if you could share us a little bit about the context of one, kind of what the timeline to date has been in terms of the spin out, and then also what lies ahead in terms of bringing such a business to life in terms of some of the, I guess, hoops you have to jump through and bringing it to market.
Yeah. So for Matrubials, literally, concept to market is 3 main boxes or buckets that I like to put things into. One is the discovery and an AI-enabled platform that is proof of concept. Bucket 2 is where there is early safety and efficacy, but in higher model organisms. So compared to what we have continued to build in Davis, which is all in vitro work in infectious diseases that allows us to sort of, if we start with a group of 20 molecules, we go through our very stringent tests to narrow down to somewhat of 3 or 5 of our top candidates that we then want to run through animal model systems for early safety and efficacy studies. Once that happens, then depending on the indication that we are choosing for one of our missions, which is women's health, we really have to go through the long-term FDA process, where once you have these early data, you have to file for investigational new drug applications with the FDA, and then go through the human trials because it's a topical product we are developing that's an intravaginal tablet. And so to determine that it actually can perform side to side with standard of care or even become better than standard of care so that it will eventually be a prescription medical drug that can be reimbursed by insurance companies. It's a really long-term path, and that's what we are looking at, but that's the right thing to do. That's what we are learning from the physicians, that we want to make sure that it reaches the hands of the patients in need rather than being something that's not really clinically vetted and ends up just as a OTC product. On the other hand, our core technology has such wide spectrum applications that we can envision that we are simultaneously going to take a second approach as well for some of these early appetite building ways where we can determine early safety and efficacy in smaller animal models. And that can directly lead to product development with FDA registration rather than wait for approval. Because again, it's a brand new entity, so we still need to have followed on the right rules. But those things can actually do, bring to us 3 important benefits. One is that we would have proven our workflow of discovery all the way to product development. At that stage, we can also have partnerships with other larger companies because they would see that we have de-risked ourselves even more. That can also start to generate some early revenue, which can then channel into our longer term mission of women's health. So we're doing those kinds of things. But yes, having a really good long-term regulatory strategy is really very critical to our business. And that also helps define the early phase clinical trials that we will be doing as we continue to meet our milestone goals. And short-term goals lead to long-term goals. And as we finesse them, we're going to reach a point where we can continue to hone in our technology even more.
I love the approach where you're building for the long term with the FDA approval, but then simultaneously moving through. I can't remember the term. It was like FDA.
It's like B2B or D2C. We can develop direct
Gotcha.
business to business or direct to consumer type of products that can resolve a lot of challenges. And also, I think in terms of being an early stage therapeutic company, trying to want to develop sort of antibiotics 2.0 focused on women's health, a lot of the times through our fundraising process, what I continue to learn is that as soon as you mention FDA, half of the people want to be like, oh, that's going to be really long term. It's just a different path, you know. So finding early relationships where people have that risk appetite to build our own confidence around them and continue to de-risk it, where we can establish more partnerships, that's going to be key to our continued growth and survival, literally speaking.
Right. Well, yeah. And once you do get approval, then, you know, you kind of have that moat around you in a way where others might haven't worked towards that process yet. So
Absolutely.
I love that. So the last kind of question before we jump into the accelerators, I know, I imagine a key part of, you know, funding this effort is accessing grants and tapping into that process. Are there any additional kind of programs or resources that you've leveraged in the grant space, whether that's SBIR, STTR, those types of programs that you know, are kind of federally funded to, you know, promote innovation and research?
Yeah, definitely. I think grants are great. They're number one, they are peer reviewed by a study section. So automatically there is validation for the technology. There's validation for the research strategy, your team. And also I think it's great for other people who want to come on board, because then they kind of realize that somebody else has taken a chance on you or approved what you're doing. Because again, the SBIR study sections are combinations of people in academic research, in corporate biotechnology, and it's just a combination of business and scientists at the same time. So we have continued to work on that. In fact, we are in the final approval stages for our first SBIR phase 1 grant, where we've submitted the JIT documents and now kind of literally just waiting for that pending award to happen. But what does happen with SBIR awards is that they open up doors for a phase 2 grant as well, which can allow for continued buildup of the project and advancement as you go through the workflow and research strategy, and also help with a lot of these very expensive animal studies that otherwise you know, venture firms or institutional investors would want to see prior to coming on board. Because that's what I've learned through my last few months, or let's say 6 months of fundraising journey, is that many institutional investors, even though they do not come on board right now, they want to come on board, but they want to see the animal data and early safety studies that have happened, because then it builds a lot of confidence for them. And typically then you have reached a stage of de-risking yourself to an extent. The truth is, in life science and biotechnology, you're continuously building tech, but you're also mainly de-risking it over and over and over and revalidating it to the point where, you know, there is almost a sure shot that if it works in these models, it ought to work when it goes into a higher order organism. It is true for ID, but yet we still have to show it, you know,
Right.
in many ways.
Awesome. Well, the key takeaway is certainly some grants can give you some of that de-risking and validation for, you know, whether that be actually the approval into the process says, you know, hey, there's something there in terms of the technology that's being built. And then also, you know, if you do want or need to raise institutional capital, that those are some kind of key points for them to be looking at in terms of that de-risking process. So if you are approaching that science-based and technology, definitely look for some of those grant opportunities. So now transitioning our conversation to some of the different accelerators you've tapped into. I know you've done 3, at least to my knowledge, 2 being local and 1 in the Bay Area. And so I would love to start with, I think it's in chronological order, was the Y Combinator, was the first one. And I remember chatting with you earlier when you got into it. It was exciting to hear that news. But yeah, would love to dive into that. And just for those in the room that don't know what Y Combinator is, it's an accelerator that provides seed funding for startups, and seed funding is that earliest stage of venture funding, and helps kind of pay for some of those expenses in getting started. And this quote comes from Y Combinator. So at Y Combinator, their goal is to get you through that first phase. This usually means get you to go to the point where you've built something impressive enough to raise money on a larger scale. Then they can introduce you to later stage investors. So would love to learn more about the Y Combinator program. I know it's something that people look to as an international kind of best practice. Would love to learn a little bit more about your experience there and kind of what that program holds and what their focus is.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. So Y Combinator, literally, that was our first check, and that happened last summer in 2021. It was a really cool interview process that we went through. There's an application that happens, and then after that, they select a group of companies for an interview process. And then the final is, I think 2% of the applicants actually make it. So when we entered the program, we learned that we were amongst the 300 companies out of 16,000 applications that summer that made it to the program. So it was top 2% of the applicants. And depending on different types of companies, they have gotten a lot into bio as well in the last several years. Typically, they started with IT and software in their beginning years, but they really have developed a niche for a lot of bio, whether it's digital or direct healthcare or therapeutics, or even technology-based platform companies in terms of continued advice. And the program started in June, and we had demo day presentations at the end of August. But it was really an intensive several weeks in terms of starting literally from scratch in terms of where you are at in the company to how you're ready to actually talk to some of the leading investors in the Bay Area, but also globally, because I remember as part of demo day and beyond, we were getting calls from investors across the whole world, literally in Europe, Asia, North and South America, in terms of being interested in companies. And there were a lot of international companies as part of the Y Combinator program as well. Their structure is very well defined in terms of what happens each month as part of the starting process when you are learning each session about the differences in terms of how to make it go from level A through level B all the way to Z in that 3-month time frame. And that includes with the funding that they provide us, what allows it for companies like us is that we can actually develop advanced technologies outside where we can rent our own space. We can continue to build more funds for IP strategies, but also actually with that amount of funding, what can you do immediately that can help you, finesse some of the aspects that you were otherwise not able to do because you didn't have the funds. And eventually it prepares really well for having conversations with institutional investors. That starts with the ABCs of fundraising. What is the minimum amount you need at this stage to meet the milestones, defining the milestone studies for the next 18 months and planning your burn rate to financial projections. So the entire workflow that we want to hear in a pitch gets actually very detail oriented, so that even though your deck is very clean in terms of fewer words on every slide, there's not any room for a single bad slide. And there's a lot of information that you actually just, absorb throughout that whole program to be able to communicate it and relay your message so that it really gets out to the conversation in more ways than one. So, I've been a bacteriologist for as many years, so you have to bear with me. But what I like to define as a company, we would be like that single bacteria. And every time you go through an accelerator, you're taking in like a new recombinant DNA inside you, and you're now being transformed. And so you're now expressing things that you haven't before based on what you took in from that accelerator. And at these stages in your early company levels, flexibility is one of the best things to have. You develop competence to absorb the right information so that you can actually have so much more benefit from taking lessons and really improvising yourself. That's the one pact you have to make with yourself as an early founder, is that I'm going to focus on improvising every single day as compared to before. But yeah, anyway.
We got some thumbs up in the chat with the bacteria reference. So
yes.
I love the ever evolving and stronger bacteria, I guess.
Yeah.
So it sounds like Y Combinator had an intentional focus. One, kind of giving you that initial capital to look at how you're going to be developing your IP strategy, actually building out some of the tech so you can get maybe some of that validation going. And one of the things that I thought really stood out to me was that defining the milestones, which I think is always a really key thing. A lot of times it's like, hey, here's the big ask that I have to raise capital, but not always tied to those milestones. I'm curious of kind of like, how did they support you in narrowing down what those milestones were? Was it you meeting with mentors or presenting your pitch deck and getting feedback and kind of through questions, or were you in like a cohort format where you chatted about gaps and getting towards defining those milestones? What did that look like?
Yeah, so the milestones and what we needed to do was starting to get defined very early on in the program, like within the first month. The pitch deck was a much later part. That was sort of like the last 15 days prior to demo day. But until then, it was really about getting everything in order so that we would be meeting with our specific group partners. So there were about 3 group partners for a lot of these biotech companies. And we would have subsections where we were meeting with individual groups of companies that are closely related somewhat or would have similar challenges or similar gains in terms of their area of interest. And so we could actually learn a lot from different founders who were part of our cohort and continue to be part of their journey at the same time, while finessing your own milestones. And then defining them with side-by-side communication with the group partners was literally about, taking a very complex problem in so many ways and making very effective decisions with asking simple questions that, okay, well, this is the burn rate for the next 18 months if you're deciding on these are the milestones. So literally breaking it down in terms of what is the budget requirement for this? What is the easiest way or the fastest way you can get some of this done for early validation that can then branch out into even more expensive experiments? Because there's such a variation in terms of, which model you're using, and that can make a difference of hundreds of thousands of dollars, when you're using a mouse versus a rabbit. So just having that information and actually simplifying it to defining what are the early stage goals that you can actually, have fruition of, which can help you define your longer term goals and mission-oriented subjects. So it was just having more information into what could be feed into that workflow so that we could have a more confident conversation with anyone, whether it even be an angel investor or an institutional investor, in terms of like, these are my next steps for the next 18 months. And by that time, I'll have reached these items if everything gets lined up, where I will be then ready for a next stage, extended seed round or somewhat of an advancement. And then eventually, one of the best things that I want to commend the Y Combinator for is, unlike a lot of the other conversations I've had, they were not limiting me because I was focused on a women's health initiative. They were not limiting me because I was focusing on peptides or a development of a therapeutic. In fact, we were the only anti-infective or antimicrobial peptide discovery company in the entire cohort. But that was not a limitation to them. They came head on and just wanted us to progress. So it was like a partnership where an investor and a founder are on the same side of the table, not on the opposite sides. So that was really amazing.
Awesome. Well, thank you for diving deeper into kind of that milestone creation. I think it's such a key aspect to the process. And, just as you're sharing and articulating those milestones to burn rate, especially when you're talking to raising additional capital, hey, this is where it's going. This is what it's going to unlock for us as a venture and open up new doors so we can continue to grow and expand. Kind of wrapping up on Y Combinator, what if you were to share any kind of last key learnings with some of the founders in this space that kind of have always wondered what's Y Combinator about? What would be some of those key learnings, or maybe keywords they could go and Google and search a little bit more on?
They wire your DNA differently after you come out of Y Combinator. In fact, I think what happens is that every founder that goes through the program and becomes a YC alumni is always looking out to help other founders, whether they are part of Y Combinator or they are other founders they meet. So it becomes like this paid forward psychology that is now part of your entire system. And I absolutely love that, because I've learned so much in just those 3 months that I felt like I was taking up a lot of information, but then also taking the time to process it and then actually have ways to express it in different in different situations. I could, and the whole system that they have developed, you could technically reach out to founders who were back from 2012, get introductions. You could reach out to anybody, and for the most part, what I found was that nobody ghosted you. They actually responded. They made connections. They wanted to help you if things fit right. And again, the whole thing, I come back to the fundraising aspect, because it is a very important aspect of early stage companies and having that capital. It helps you learn also that the early no's can become real shockers when you're not used to it. And even if you've been a scientist for many years and are always humbled by science on a daily basis with experiments and stuff, it can still boggle you down in some ways. But then you realize very quickly that, again, going back to my recombinant DNA technology, it's like the sticky ends of DNA. Everything has to match really perfectly for that molecule to come to fruition. Otherwise, even a little mismatch, like a lock and a key, then it's not going to work. It may work at a later stage. But just building that community around other YC founders has been very meaningful. And it's a new purpose in so many ways to give it back.
I love it. Well, I enjoy how you tie so much to science, and I feel like there's a science to your workflow and the way that you talk about going through customer development or building milestones. So the scientist is certainly coming out in the positive sense of that. So transitioning to the next program that you tapped into, which we further got acquainted with through FourthWave. And those not familiar with FourthWave, it's an accelerator for female-led technology businesses. We are a partner here at the Carlson Center with this program. So would love for you to share a little bit more about your experience with FourthWave and how maybe the focus was different than Y Combinator and what you took away from that program.
Yeah. So FourthWave is really unique in terms of the whole feature list of what that program offers. In so many ways, FourthWave allowed me to understand myself better, understand my own personality in terms of, tapping into what are the pain points that really bother me and how to overcome them, how to heal from them. I'd never done an Enneagram before, so I think I got to understand so much more about myself, but also interactions with other people, whether they are your direct team members or they're people who you otherwise interact with. And one of the most important aspects was also conscious leadership in FourthWave, where you get to actually really lead with a lot of purpose and follow the intention of what you're building. Like, why are you there building this? Why isn't this already been done before? What is the unique position that you are in that you can actually continue to grow for? And FourthWave, also one of the most important lessons I took from is to better understand perspectives and opinions of other people, even if they're completely and dramatically different than your own, and how to actually take them in a positive stride and evaluate the situation better so that you can move that forward. Because what happens is that, when you're continuously moving forward, you are simultaneously also facing some or the other setback. Now, whether that setback is where you are stuck in that same position or whether you're actually taking some steps backwards, when you start taking steps backwards, it's actually for fear installation in you. It's also that there's some confidence breaking out in you. And those kinds of things actually take you away from your goals. What I think FourthWave also allowed for me to experience is that the human brain has immense capacity to heal, to absorb shocks, and to really take them in a positive stride without any personal consequence, but actually make them go towards your goal development. So I think it was so much more informative in terms of being part of FourthWave for like an overall leadership aspect and just a personality development and personality understanding course. But that wasn't it. There was also a lot of coaching relevant to the business aspects. I was really grateful that I got to continue to work with Jesse and Jan, who were part of my business leaders. And that also worked towards, bettering your ability to tell a story. As scientists, we often get caught up into talking a lot more about the science and the data. And at FourthWave, I continued to be pressed into learning how to better tell a story and also focus equally well on the business aspect of it, on the strategies that will lead for more meaningful process development compared to what we already know about the technology. And so those kinds of, early stage feedback from FourthWave continue to stay with me. And I still read the books that were recommended in that program. And the community is wonderful. Again, like Y Combinator, it doesn't end when the program ends. As you are aware, the FourthWave community, it's a strong community of women who continue to, have each other's back, literally speaking.
Definitely. We'll love that. And thanks for sharing a little bit more about FourthWave. It is unique in the focus around kind of the leadership capacity. And I appreciate the tie to kind of understanding perspectives, especially as you're building a team and working with customers and raising funds and things like that, right? There's so many perspectives that are being thrown at you as a founder, and seeing where you stand in that and how others might be perceiving what you're trying to build in those types of things. How have you maybe used Enneagram in with your team, or whether that be Enneagram or conscious leadership? And for those of you that aren't familiar with Enneagram, it's a leadership, or it's a typing tool to help you kind of see how you see the world and how others see it. So I'm a type 2. What were you, Ashita?
I was a type 8 and a 1 tie.
There you go. So, well, you'll have to look it up, but it kind of shows how you perceive the world, and as you're building teams, it gains that additional perspective. So, would love to hear if that's something that you've kind of utilized in your team, whether that be formally or informally. Would love to kind of see how you.
Informally, actually, I'm utilizing a lot of those concepts. We haven't had discussions in our founder teams about, hey, what is your personality or what is mine? But overall, just I think easing up some of the conversations or taking more balanced approach to different perspectives and just trying to understand where different people are coming from. It really has been immensely useful to learn that. And also about your own self, you look at yourself in the mirror and you're the best judge of your own strengths, talents, but also your own flaws, right? So your own conscience tells you where you're mistaken, and to be able to learn from that and make yourself the better version compared to yesterday. That's a constant challenge. To be your own hero is one of the hardest thing to do, because you're going to see right through it if you're not doing something right. And so I think just, taking all of that information into my stride and being laser focused on what can I do better today compared to yesterday, and what mistakes did I make that I do not want to repeat again. And also give other people the benefit of the doubt, be less judgmental, although I don't think I was ever really that judgmental. But still every human being goes back and forth into different phases as life goes on. So just, trying to be a better person is one of the key lessons that I think is instrumental to any founder journey. And science teaches you to stay humble. Entrepreneurship teaches you to stay humble. And overall, the combination of that is that's the only way to move forward, come what may, in terms of whether your company becomes incredibly successful. And again, success means different things to different people. For me, I feel like if I've put my best foot forward in terms of absorbing all the right information and taken it from goal A to goal B, that's my time frame success. And then you keep building on that, Yeah, that's what.
Well, thank you for diving a little deeper into that and providing some, context around how you've applied Enneagram and some of these leadership concepts to your team. I want to go back to a point that you made in working with Jesse, and I think you said Jane or Janet. I can't remember who. Jane, yeah.
Yes.
And so was talking about telling a story. And so a lot of times, I certainly see founders, they're deep in the tech and they talk all about what the technology does, but maybe not bring the person and that story into it. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that transformation looked like, and you kind of telling the story of your business? I remember seeing kind of one of your first presentations of 1 million cups, and it was deep, great deep science. And it's like, hey, how do we apply that in the story? So I'd love to kind of hear how that growth took place and what that looked like.
Yeah, no, that growth has happened over a period of, the last several months. And again, in combination with all the 3 programs I've been a part of that started with Y Combinator, continued at FourthWave, and now I'm still honing in to better my story as part of Growth Factory and the advice that we're getting at that stage. But it truly is about, getting the message across in a real simple way to people who have never heard your story before. In so many ways, anyone, your son or your mother literally should be able to repeat the same aspect of your story back to you without you having to show slides to them. That's sort of the kind of lessons we learned as part of all of the 3 accelerators. And more so also, reaching to different types of audiences. So there are, in our case, there are 2 distinct type of investors that we talk with. Some who are really generic and have recently got into life sciences and are not very much at an expert level or PhD level getting into the deep tech. And then others who are actually, all 4 on the team who would join the meeting would be either medical doctors or PhDs with strong backgrounds in science. So to actually learn through the process of starting with a big picture and then honing it down, depending on who the audience is. If they're the medtech folks, they want to see all the data points and all the concentrations and what is the therapeutic index. Whereas if I'm talking to somebody else, they want to listen to what is the TAM and what is really the turnaround time for the product. So different questions get asked by different audiences, and to have that one common story where you can certainly go back to a deck if a deeper question is asked, or you can actually just speak it when somebody's asking you. So, consolidating all of that information, but relaying it in an effective way to different audiences, that certainly is a challenge, in many ways for deep science related companies. But I think we have come a long way as compared to like if we were talking last February. And I feel that. I mean, I'm looking at our previous decks and some of my conversations, and what I'm looking at right now can be dramatically different. And I think it comes from the tremendous work that these accelerator programs do in terms of wanting startup founders to succeed as part of the partnerships. So deep gratitude.
What a great point on knowing your audience and kind of tailoring that presentation to them, whether that's a more generic presentation where it might be a little bit more about the story, and certainly you don't want to leave out core elements of the technology, which still is kind of that secret sauce. But if you're with the deep med and the doctors, right, they're going to be looking for that because that's a core aspect of that succeeding. So just wanted to echo that point. And then just wanted to also pull something out, just the nature that you're continually learning and open to that feedback and growth, right? I think that's a key aspect to where you've certainly gotten with Matrubials and kind of taking that feedback and sometimes it's like, hey, the technology is the key aspect, but then it's like, hey, we've evolved that and told the story and all those types of things. So just
absolutely. I think that you're so right. That's the key element, being really flexible to feedback and learning from a variety of diverse people in terms of what has worked, what is really essential. Because at the end of the day, if I'm having a one-on-one call and the person who I'm talking to doesn't have the 5 points I want to make as a take-home lesson, then I haven't done the job right, So making sure that you're speaking in a way that it's reflective of your message, but also respectful of the other person's time that they've spent on coming and attending your meeting. I think it's really important to make sure that both of those aspects are met. And like I said, it's the lock and key. Then eventually, it's not that every meeting you have is going to result in an outcome that somebody emails you 20 minutes later that we are on board. But it's good because I think it leaves room for extended relationships, because what that has helped me, Cameron, is so many people have come back saying, we really want to come on board, but this is what we will wait for. So stay in touch. It's not now, but we want to be in touch and we want to get updates from you. And that actually is a positive message, because otherwise, these people don't have time. They would just say, well, goodbye. But the fact that there's reason enough to send updates, that's really useful. Whether it materializes into something over a period of the next 2 or 3 years is a different story, but at least there is that option. So being flexible to feedback, not taking criticism personally, I think those are really important aspects, because ultimately you have to do any and everything that's important for the company and have to move yourself, like Ishita, the person, away from that, because it's Matrubials that's in focus right now. That's what we want to continue to build on.
Love that. A follow-up to that last point, how do you keep in touch with some of these, whether that be investors or potential partners that say, maybe not right now, but maybe in the future? Is there, bringing in your kind of like science and your workflow methodology? Do you have a certain process that you go through, or what does that look like for other founders to grab a hold of?
Yeah, no. So I take feedback very seriously, and not all investors who have said no would send a feedback note, but the ones that have, and if it is the true feedback that they wanted to have an intention of, then, whenever there is attraction relevant to what their ask was, it's always important to find out, like, what is it that they would require for them to continue the conversation or even have a follow-up call. And to take notes of that and try to reach out again in the future that this is where I'm at. Are you open to a call again? And that has happened for us, so whether it has been originally through a cold outreach or through a warm introduction, subsequent meetings can happen if you reach out and say, well, this is what we talked about. We've now been able to reach A, B, and C. Would you be open to a call? And that's sort of one way I keep track of which are the groups of people who I want to reach out to when we have met milestone A, B, and C. And those who will not fit because, the portfolio companies in their profile are not like us, or they're not therapeutics, or they don't like FDA related products or long-term, or they're completely really just, in digital healthcare, which we are not. So learning all those lessons in terms of conversations leading up to future relationships, I think having an organized way of looking at that again and again is very useful.
Yes, definitely. Awesome. We'll keep the workflow going, and sounds like it's working for you. So the last accelerator that would love to dive into. So you're currently a part of the inaugural cohort of the Growth Factory. For those of you that don't know the Growth Factory, it's a newly launched accelerator in the Sacramento region, and would love to dive a little bit deeper into the inner workings of this program, yet again, kind of that accelerator realm, but taking on a different form. So would love to learn more about what the focus of this program is and kind of how you tapped into those resources and programmatic efforts.
Yeah, so, there was a short time where there was an overlap between FourthWave and Growth Factory when we were part of that. And Growth Factory, the way it's structured and designed for the whole one-year program is really, again, taking your materials that you have at that early stage when you're joining that cohort and really finessing it, talking about it to multiple different groups of people, but also the workshops that they organize, the mentor dinners that are really inspiring stories of people who have done these activities before us and succeeded, and also have had many opportunities to provide their own feedback and lessons, but also going into our individual stories, learning from other co-founders who are part of the cohort, even though they may be very different companies. I think there's so much to absorb from even like a company that has nothing to do with anti-infectives or therapeutics and maybe building robots. But just like learning about it from a business angle is really incredible actually at this stage, because that allows you to kind of define what you could do for your business, even if it's from an unrelated field, and whether they can do the same thing in their own field. So Growth Factory is, it's just building this momentum in the Sacramento-Davis region. And I just really love the energy out there. One of the first meetings that we had there, my observation was that, hey, we are coming in with, if you're familiar with how PCR or polymerase chain reaction works, you start with a small fragment of DNA, it gets amplified like 1 million times. And I was like, this is what this program feels like. Everybody's energies are amplified like within just that 1 hour of talking here. and it feels phenomenal. You can actually feel it and feed off of it and take it back home. And you know, Mark has this finesse and ability to ask simple but really deep questions. So I'll tell you, for example, like just this question he's asked multiple times through the cohort. And one of that is like, what can you do with what you have right now or what you got right now? And so many times we get into complex situations where we feel like, you know, this is going to take a long time to get out of. And when I come back home or when I'm driving from Growth Factory, I think of these questions that he asked, like, what can you do right now, though, to solve this problem? And I was like, well, right now, you're right. You know, the rabbit is going to take a lot of money and a long time, but I can do the mouse. I can do this. I can make that into a second indication that works. So really, you know, taking difficult situations, but asking simple questions that can possibly have effective solutions that you can think of. Literally, those are the things that help me, you know, connect point A to point B and then keep developing there and not stop. You know, there's always another meeting lined up beyond that to help me out. So I'm incredibly grateful. And of course, Monique and Rick and Mirshad and DJ, they're all available with their expert advice and just, you know, literally like helping us every single day, like with this investor showcase that's coming up too, you know, just like we did with FourthWave. Until last minute, we were finessing our workflow. We're doing similar things there too, but, you know, just I think it's like one step forward now that we have had 6 more months.
I love it. Again, the continual learning aspect, whether that be from those, you know, mentor dinners where you're actually, you know, kind of hearing from someone, and then also just being in the space with other co-founders and kind of seeing how they approach problem solving or looking at business through a different lens. So
Yeah.
I think that that's a really key aspect. And, you know, certainly accelerators can, you know, provide that, you know, format where you're connecting in a cohort, but, you know, there's also other ways similar to like a startup happy hour where you hop into networking and, you know, kind of meet someone. And so I think just making that intention to always be listening and seeing how, you know, other people are approaching that. And then I love the power of the simple but deep question. So what you can do with what you have right now. So that's a good one to.
It's a very good
put that up on the wall, and you know, I don't know if that'll haunt you, but you know, nonetheless, it does take a, you know, that complex, you know, time to maybe narrow it down, right? It makes me think of a little bit of conscious leadership of, are you reacting, or are you taking that space to respond and see what's going on, and reframing the question. So I think
reframing the question and just solidifying your intention and, you know, the purpose of, are you taking steps backwards, but backwards to reach the same goal from a slightly different angle, how you do that. That's really key. And in so many ways for startup founders, we are all adults, but we have to be childlike in terms of our absorption capacity. And we like sponges in so many ways, taking so much information in and just really using it to our benefit in terms of advancing. Yeah, so I think, you know, what you all have built with StartupSac and 1 million cups and now Growth Factory is continuing to accelerate that momentum. I think it's phenomenal for this region. And we're so delighted that we get to be a part of these communities that are around here and want good for everyone. We've seen that with Trifecta and Grin and like 2 companies that have reached amazing success from this area. And there can be potential for so many other companies and employment going forward in this valley. It just is an enriching experience for sure.
Definitely, the you know, success breeds that success in terms of confidence that, you know, certainly we as a region can do it. And, you know, we like to have, you know, the startup happy hour be that platform of sharing those experiences and, you know, setting the stage for those future founders to learn from one another. So I love that aspect. I did see in the chat, the Growth Factory is accepting applications for their next cohort, which will be in May. And then I know there was a question around our FourthWave cohort. I believe we'll be accepting applications probably in the next month or 2, and that aims to start in the June timeframe and runs through November. So thank you for pointing those elements out. So I have one last question on kind of the accelerator portion, and then would love to just kind of close with the last couple questions. So for those of you that are here, start to get your mind going. I know we talked a lot here in different veins, but so get your questions ready for Ashita. So the last question I have in kind of the accelerator space was, as you look at these experiences, how would you as a founder best prepare yourself, one, to get accepted into these programs, but also position yourself to succeed, right? It's one thing to get accepted, but not be fully ready to embrace all that's coming. What would you kind of recommend for founders that are, hey, I'm looking for that next step, and I think an accelerator program might be that? How would I best position myself to do that? And then how can I position myself to succeed in going through it?
There's only one short answer to that, that's hard work. You have to build yourself and become competent enough to get first into those accelerators, but also then continue to remain competent to absorb all that information. You'll hate me if I nerd it out again with bacteria, but when bacteria have to accept foreign DNA, they have to become competent. It's the same way. A company has to do its job to actually really, write honest applications of where they're at, what they need advice with, what they envision their next milestones to be. And all of those early on, even if they're not very, very well defined, as most accelerators understand, because they want to be a part of that early planning stages, it's important to have enough information where you're relying on some of the two main aspects of every company. So for example, for us, at Matrubials, I believe that our core lies in the two main strands, which are technology and team. And those two are sort of the core elements of us. For example, when there are any sort of setbacks, my way of dealing with it as going back and continuing to validate my technology and making sure that that really holds true, that continues to perform as we want it, and then relying on an excellent team. Because if you are at a stage where you need to advance on your mission or that you need to pivot, a very the team that has expert opinions on it will be able to really come along right away, whether you're expanding or pivoting. And so those are sort of some of the main aspects. For any accelerator to get you in, they want to see both of those things. They want to see that your core idea or your technology is really unique, that you've done your homework in terms of why you will be different, why you're doing this at this time, and whether your solution is actually going to match the problem that you want to really figure out. And then they're going to look at your team. And there are different requirements. For example, certain accelerators require that as you join them, there be 2 full-time co-founders. Others are like where you actually have to transition from your existing job and then become a full-time person at the company. But once you are in, it's your job to really be extremly open, really flexible to all the learnings that you get offered, and really just take it into your stride and build yourself so that you now have like 5x the capacity as you did the day before you joined the accelerator. So, and we are all capable of doing that. We just have to do it.
Love it. So it sounds like hard work is certainly a key aspect, per usual. And then, kind of understanding, the role that your team plays, right? If you're a sole founder, that might be good for where you're at, but, starting to look at, hey, if I'm going to take a leap into this, who do I need to surround myself with, and where, where would I focus, and where do I need to add capacity to us as a team? And then some are looking for that kind of, jargony term, but problem solution fit, right? Is there a there in what I'm trying to build, and have I done my hard work, due diligence, and doing that kind of customer discovery process, or at least position myself to be going through that particular process? So
well said. Yeah.
Thank you. And I love the 5x capacity. I think that's always a key aspect, and that could be, shifting your mindset to say,
you're
hey,
shifting
how do
your
I get,
mindset. Yes.
I get everything out of it. So
yeah, and it's so interesting. Like I feel like we all have limitless capacity in our brains, and it all comes down to that. It's a mindset, it's a thought process that then just gives you the energy to do it. So once that shift happens, things shape up really well. And that doesn't mean that you're suddenly at a level where you're now raising your Series A. but you are meeting the goals that you need to in your short-term timeframe so that you can continue to build up. But yeah, I think that's where we are. And, like I said before, I'm super excited, and I feel like there is so much more to learn. We're still at mile 2 and we have to go a long way.
There you go. Mile 2 of a marathon indeed, but nonetheless, you'll be picking up steam as you're going, right? And so it's been fun to watch the growth of Matrubials in yourself. So the last 2 questions I have, I'll kind of package them together, and then we'll transition to some of our audience questions here. So the first being, is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience about your entrepreneurial journey or Matrubials, or just kind of key things that have been a key part of your startup experience? And then lastly is, how can we as a community support you as you continue to grow Matrubials? And then we'll turn it over to some Q&A.
Yeah. No, I think for me, it's just, it's been fascinating in terms of going through this process and journey. Like I said, I continued to be in academia and was building that. And it was a by chance kind of a thing that we decided, hey, this needs a company, this needs translation. We need to bring out these products for benefiting human health. And, what I think is oftentimes one of the messages I have is like, people with a lot of strong scientific background continue to do that and do not want to get on the other side of business development. But when the opportunity arises, if you're willing to take that, you can develop both, and you can actually translate yourself into the business side of the scientific discoveries that you've made as well. What I also appreciated learning from Y Combinator is like the fact that they do support of tech people or deep science people to actually become the initial founders and executives of the company, because they really know the problem in and out. They know the technology in and out, and they can take the company to a stage where then if it reaches a scalability and commercialization aspect, somebody else who probably has the ability to give it 125% versus a 75 can come on board. But early stages like ours, I think there is a lot of potential for scientists to continue to lead that path. That's one. And the other is that I'm here based on the lessons that I've learned. I'm here for anyone else who wants to, chat with me or continue to have meetings with me in terms of any ways I can pay it forward so that they won't go through some of the mistakes I made early on. That's one thing. And as far as ask from the community here, I feel like I just want to say thank you. And, this continued building of resources that are useful and benefiting the overall entrepreneurial system that you guys are all doing. Just keep doing that. That's what is going to be, you're in so many ways going to become that way a part of numerous companies that come out of this area because of this network that has been built here.
Love it. So some of the takeaways, if I was to spit it back, one was, looking at if you are, kind of in that deep science space and kind of working on the technology that, you can become that business development person and translate. You're certainly a representation of that in your story and starting Matrubials. And so it certainly can be done. And, it does come with a level of risk, but sounds like it's certainly worth that risk. And then, that there actually is kind of a longing for having these deep science, individuals to become those founders. And you mentioned a core aspect of understanding the problem. And I know a key part of the growth factory is the lean canvas and, lean startup methodology. And I know a core saying is love the problem, not the solution, right? And so understanding that the problem is at the root of what you're trying to solve for your customers. And so that's where that deep science can really come in and understand that problem with the many intricacies that it has. And then lastly, that you're open to connecting with some of the founders and finding a way to continue to support the ecosystem. And, I think that that's such a key aspect for entrepreneurial communities to continue to grow, is that, they call it entrepreneurial recycling, where that knowledge continues to be shared and, continue to support founders going forward. And lastly, as for us, we'll get our 5x our capacity so we can continue to building resources and supporting the ecosystem. So we'll harness our inner Ashita to get us there. So without further ado,
you get transformed by that recombinant DNA. For that
yes,
purpose.
exactly. I need a little, I guess, PCR to amplify the work, and hopefully no positive PCR test, but nonetheless, we'll transition to the open Q&A here, but want to say thank you, Ashita, for the conversation. I really enjoyed chatting with you, and it's been so fun to see the growth of Matrubials, and I know you'll be a continued success. So if there's any questions, feel free to get those virtual Zoom hands raised. Looks like Jeff's got the first hand raised, so take it away, and then we'll go.
Well, I do, but if somebody else, Tracy's got, I'm going to cede to Tracy. Go ahead, Tracy.
All right, you're ceding to Tracy.
Hello.
Hi,
Tracy.
Yeah, we can hear you and see you.
Yeah, nice meeting you guys, and thank you, Ishita, for such a great talk. I am a student founder here in Toronto, and I'm currently working on my own startup with a couple of my classmates. It's like a tech startup, and we are in the process of like trying to raise fundings. So I was just wondering, what are some of the, what is like the timeline look like for your fundraising process, and what are some of the key indicators that you're looking for in your fundraising process? Be like, oh, hey, like maybe after this, I'm going to need to start another round of fundraising, and after this, I'm going to start the next round. Thank you.
Yeah, no, great question. I think, what I've learned as early stage founding CEO is that you are continuously in the process of fundraising. There's not really that much gaps in between when you have closed a round and when you're starting to think of raising your next round. In fact, I hear from other founders that on the day you close your seed round, you're already starting to figure out what is going to be your next round and how you're going to do it. I'm not at that stage yet. We're raising our seed round right now. So beyond Y Combinator, we have raised another 675K in total. But we are continuing to do that because we need a lot more funding at this early stage too, because of our life science budgetary needs. But by the time that happens and we meet the milestones, there will be time to start thinking of building the story again, incorporating all the milestones to raise the next round. And if you hear nowadays how companies work, they raise seed A, seed B, up to seed F before they're ready for their series A round. So you may be in that process. The important thing to remember is that while you're fundraising, you continue to want to build your company as well, and have both of those going in parallel. So you have multiple people on the aspect where one person is dedicated to fundraising, the other person is actually continuing to finesse your technology, building code, or whatever your actual model is. So not take any one aspect for granted and work on every part of the business simultaneously. I think that's sort of the key strategy to do that. But also take care of yourself, most importantly, while you're doing all of that, because it can be overwhelming, and build that own support system where you are relying on your own team members, helping each other and taking turns from exhaustion if that's the case, but also overall just go.
Sounds good. Yeah, I just have one last question before passing it to other people. So I was wondering, how do you find like the community belongs to yourself as like a founder? Because I think that's like very important. Like outside of the accelerator programs, how do you find like the founder communities to sort of help each other, keep the momentum up, and share the energy together?
Yeah, just build really honest relationships. And one thing I heard somewhere that I'm going to just shamelessly copy here is flex the muscle called trust a lot more. Like trust people around you. In so many ways, the world is filled with good people who want to help each other. And inspiration is literally like in abundance. You just have to look for it. So share stories, learn from other founders who are, either in similar situations ahead of you or behind you. I mean, I don't mean that in a literal way, but for somebody who has founded a company yesterday versus you've been working at it for 6 months, I mean it in that way. So building relationships where you are, taking notes from each other, lessons from each other, and And one key aspect is share the pain because it dilutes it, definitely. That's an old saying I heard like when I was a little girl. And then when you have milestones, share those too, celebrate those early milestone celebrations with your community members and co-founders is really important. It's inspiring to people around you. And it's even though you may be just on your own path, there isn't that competitive aspect, but there's like a community building aspect where you are still working tie to tie with each other. I think that's really something I strive to do in my own life as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're like really tempted to move to the States. And after the talk, I think we'll definitely probably do something in the future. And yeah, thank you so much for a great talk. And I'm really glad I came to this event tonight.
Yeah, good luck to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy, for the questions. Jeff, it looks like you have the next hand raised.
Okay, I have several, so I have to decide. But you mentioned being at mile 2, and so I wanted, as a CEO, it's your job to kind of be the strategist. So I'm wondering if you could paint a picture of your vision for the next, say, 5 to 10 years of Matrubials, its impact on society, not so much the venture, raising funding. But if the Sacramento Business Journal did an article 10 years from now, what would you hope to see as the highlights being that far down the road of this venture you've started and its impact on society?
That's such a good question for long-term vision of the company. And where we want to be at in the next 10 years is to have built multiple products that are medical prescription as well as OTC type products that are benefiting human health in a way of reducing the burden of infectious diseases, not just for women, but for men and women, all genders and ages, that these are really like that a company out of the Sacramento-Davis region sort of is now an antibiotics 2.0 company that built products that can reduce the rates of hospitalizations, that can actually allow for improvisations in reproductive outcomes for women in family planning stages. If those two aspects get met, that's going to be a huge contribution that the company can make, and sort of a great validation for what comes out of university-led research that gets spun out and developed via translation for giving back, literally for the benefits of public health. As early stage, based on business model type of discussions, we are an asset building as well as a platform company where we continue to make more discoveries and try to keep diverting them into a variety of additional indications, depending on the strength of our core technology. That's what we are envisioning as our full-on long-term strategy. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Jeff, for the question. It looks like Laura's got the physical hand raised in the virtual world. So go ahead, Laura.
I couldn't, I am on, not muted. I couldn't find my cursor. So good thing that Cameron noticed my physical hand. So I wanted to point out in the chat, Pam Marone joined us, and Pam took her company IPO, I forget when, back in 2011 or something like that. But anyway, she gave you some great compliments in the chat and said you were giving excellent advice. So,
that is so kind of her. I'm delighted. I'm flattered, honestly.
Have you met Pam in person?
We haven't met in person. We have interacted via email and on some of the other meetings of this sort, but I actually would love to meet her in the upcoming weeks. And there is, I'm sure from her journey, there's so many different insights and lessons to learn.
Yeah, she said before the best way to connect with her is to connect with her on LinkedIn and message her there. So, and she was raising her hand or giving claps and all that kind of stuff. So,
so nice.
Yeah. So, and she mentors female founders as well, particularly in the sciences. So that could be interesting. I was going to ask you if you knew about Five Star Bank Tank.
Yes, I do. And actually, we did participate in their last meeting at Sutter Club. I think that was back in November or late October.
Yeah.
They had a pitch event in Sacramento that we got to attend and be a part of. So yeah, it was wonderful actually to be there.
Did it result in any investor interest for you?
No, it did not at that time. And but we've had conversations with few people that we met there either before or after that, and then we're looking into continuously, engaging with local networks as well, and are starting to put our applications on GUST so that we can also connect with angel groups that are within the Northern California region for trying to build our round. Like I said, we have been able to raise $675,000 so far, and we are continuing to build our equity round to meet these milestones.
Yeah. That's great. And for those on the call who don't know what Five Star Bank Tank is, it's an investor salon event. It's invite only, but if you know investors, or if you reach out to John Gregory at Five Star Bank, send him your pitch deck, you could get an invite. So usually it's for pre-seed and seed stage companies. So it's not something to check out. What else? Do you think you can spend too much time at accelerators?
You can spend too much time. That's an interesting question. In many ways, I feel like the structure and the definition that each accelerator offers at this current time is based on their continued path of structured modifications so that it suits the needs of founders at those stages. Having said that, now that we have been a part of 3 different and diverse groups of accelerators, I feel like now we would be at a stage where we do not want to engage in terms of that kind of continued program that involves meetings and all of that. Although we are part of now already those 3 programs, and will continue to be a part of their meetings. So we don't need a new accelerator for our business. But keeping those lessons alive, keeping that momentum with them. And I feel like, I said this frequently, but just gentle reminders and that from the community, they're so useful at every stage that they just make you move that one step where you may be getting slowed down. So I think we're at that stage where we are happy with how much we've got so far. And we want to just absorb that information and keep processing that, not be part of yet another accelerator, but just, focus on the relationships we've already built and take that forward.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I'm real excited about how far you've come. The other question I have, not everybody knows this, but we talked about it early on. Your husband is also an entrepreneur and has his own company. And I know, like in some families, it's like one spouse like keeps the day job while the other one, builds the entrepreneurial dream or whatever. But with 2 entrepreneurs with 2 separate businesses, and I also think you both have regular jobs as well, although you may have transitioned out of that. How's that juggling in your family? Do we have kids in the mix too? Or?
Yes, we have a kid and a dog. Yeah, no, it's actually, I think, it's brought so much more respect for each other, all as compared to we already did have before. And in terms of, like I said, enhancing your own capacity 5x, that's the way it goes. And the truth is that we are both extremely busy, but having that focus on some quality family time where all of us are together, that has worked out to be like the really key ingredient to keeping calm and not losing our balance and still maintaining that core aspect of our good family life. That has been really critical in so many ways, because Saurabh started his company back in 2017, and he's a full-time clinician. So a lot of things did change, in the terms of last 2 years with COVID and patients and all of that. But yet, the business is what he does whenever he has in between the times, and also evenings and weekends. And so it's literally 2 full-time jobs for him as well. But yeah, I think it's just, it strengthens the relationships, I think, in many ways.
Yeah. Well, also you guys are on a very similar journey. So you have understanding of what a founder's going through. Whereas when it's just one spouse going through that, it might be harder for the other one to understand, what needs to be prioritized when. So,
that's really the key to it, that understanding that you need to do this, and you need to do this now, and everything else can wait because it's not that urgent. So yeah, so true.
That's it for my questions.
Thank you.
Any other questions? We've got time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions, and then we can wrap up. But if nobody else has a question, I want to make sure we give everybody time. But I could have a backup question. Nobody? So I kind of a going out question might be good. Is advice for other scientists in life science or biotech who may have an idea? They're deep in their science. They have an idea similar to what you did, but they don't know how to start to make that into a business. What advice would you give to those people who are deep in the science, but they have really no idea how to start a business and do something with that?
Yeah, that's sort of, literally where we were at a few years ago, where it was just a thing that, hey, this needs to translate. And then it started with really understanding the market needs. Do we have a chance? Do we have the ability to deliver something that will be unique, that will be recommended, that will be needed? How will it be different? So there were so many initial aspects that were involved in that research before we even decided to found a company. And then it was all about, what do we do to manage the workflow so we can get there? So you define the end goal and then walk backwards in terms of a stepwise way of what is needed each way. And then you start at that original step of how you need to go. But doing a lot of the background research as to, well, you have discovered something, but does it really need to be out in the market, or is it going to be somewhat of an additional product for a problem that's already being solved by 200 other products in the market? So understanding that there is a true product market fit, and mainly talking to experts in the field. So for example, with our case and a women's health indication, we started conversations early on with experts in the field that, well, this is what we have and this is what we think. But as a physician, what is really your opinion in terms of what you see in the clinic? Will something of this sort be beneficial? Will it be really? So talking to sort of, if you're defining the physician as our end customer, having conversations with them helps you define that what you're building will actually have a meaningful outcome in terms of the end user. And then after that, once you know that, yes, there is that chance, then you start to think about what are the ways to get to that stage. So really defining the workflow. For example, in the life science stages, discovery happens in the lab. Then have you validated it in higher model systems? Because it's that stepwise process. You cannot directly go into humans. So what will you do enough to de-risk it so that somebody will let you do a clinical trial? And it just helps define, go backwards and then do these processes that help you meet those milestones. At each stage, if there is a successful outcome, then you can go back into your workflow diagram and go define the next steps and do them. It also involves a lot of early studies on budgeting and how much funding that goes into even some of these early stage research programs that you need to build. How many molecules do you really need to discover before having that pyramid, of the final top 2 that go into the next stages? So defining each stage in terms of alternative approaches or pitfalls, or how you will literally in ways that we write SBIR grants, but defining that as part of like a business workflow becomes really crucial early on. And that's not to say that what you define early on remains the final draft, but at least that gives you a framework of where you can make optimized modifications to continue to keep meeting it on the same line that gives you a straight path to point B or point C. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, if there are no other questions, I'm looking at chat, I'm looking to see hands, I'm not seeing anything. If there's not, going once, going twice, I think we'll wrap up then. So point everybody's attention to the chat where Cameron has pasted in some links to some upcoming events. But Ishita, I want to thank you again for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I don't know how you could find the time to do this, but thank you. We really appreciate it. And as Laura mentioned, others in the chat have really appreciated your insights and your experience and your advice here. So thank you again for that.